highly toxic, so we don't want to be using those. So if we think about how we bring things together mechanically, it's an interesting challenge for us as architects, but it also allows us to kind of think of end of life. And there's life cycles, do we want materials to be long-lasting or not? And what's the life cycle of our buildings and designing for that life cycle? And also this idea of transparency, that becomes incredibly important. These are the chemicals of concern that we've lost there, and the health implications and the chemicals that create these health conditions. So if we think again about these formaldehyde VOCs and environmental agents, we're looking at, these are acid and citric acid. As we think about the toxics, those are the leads and other chemicals in that list. We think of endocrine disruptions, we're looking at dioxins, bisphenols, pesticides, EPA, DDT, and antimicrobials. Antimicrobials are a big deal. It should be a red light for you. They should set off alarm bells when you see antimicrobials. Limited use, unnecessary, mostly and definitely not useful in the built environment. Hallucinogens, which were a surprise for us, that a lot of these chemicals are tied to problems with metabolic processes. And then these reproductive toxicants, which is the infertility issue that we talked a little bit about before. So, this is sometimes what drives a firm or an architect's kind of agenda. How do you set goals for yourself? And sometimes you're setting those goals for yourself in terms of your own ideology, your own set of ethics, what you want to achieve. Often it's driven by the client who may want to have certifications in their buildings. But I'm really sorry about the text here. It's really not very nice. Anyway, you set yourself, whatever it is, this agenda, and then you follow this so that you understand, what is guiding you in your decision making. So if we look at a firm like Perkins & Will, who've been working in this space for a long time, this is a kind of a case study of what they've been doing in their processes in their firm. So what they do is they, kind of similarly to what we looked at before, they look at chemicals that occur in some of these common product categories. And so if we look here at the paints on the walls, typically contain these VOCs and other chemicals. If we think about furniture is particularly problematic. Antimicrobials, flame retardants, and stain-resistant finishes for them. Similarly, in this wood furniture here, the floors, we're looking at PVC, phthalates, VOCs, often formaldehyde is there that you're probably familiar with, and fabrics and insulation, we're looking at flame retardants, polyurethanes and styrenes, which are all kind of problematic. And so how do you respond in those situations which are fairly straightforward? So one of those ways is to look at paints that are phthalate-free. We're big fans of these mineral-based paints, lime-based paints that are really inert, hard surfaces, beautiful finish to them, don't have any phthalates in them, and create really hard, breathable surfaces. And most surfaces now are flame retardant-free, and you request no stain treatments. That's an added finish to them. So there are ways of kind of responding to these simple products and ensuring that you get a better product in the end. Miller Hull designed and built the Bullitt Center in Seattle, and they've developed these 10 kind of best principles for themselves, and it starts with education and buy-in from the team, time. They use the Green Science Policy Institute 6 classes as a framework for them to make decisions, and really kind of make sure that they have a coherent plan for ensuring that these material health initiatives are prioritized and implemented all the way through the process. Identifying this red list, this is their first version of this material health sustainable initiative, and it's really removing PVCs, flame retardants, halogenated flame retardants, hexavalent chromium, which is a big issue, phthalates, formaldehyde, and BPA. So this is 6 classes. They have an interesting, if you don't know or don't remember your chemistry from school, and you haven't really had to think about chemistry for a while, the 6 classes, Arlene Blum's organization has a great little 3-minute introduction to each of these 6 categories of chemicals, 6 classes of chemicals that they've come up with, and it's worth a look just to remind you of your chemistry and give you a little bit of background in this area. So this is hazard avoidance and alternatives, really thinking about what you're trying to avoid and what the alternatives are to them, and having a list that you can refer to so that you can say, I'm not going to be looking at high or even low VOC paints, for example. I'm going to really be looking at something that's not plastic-based, that may be a more benign alternative. This is an interesting approach too, and this is something we developed for LTL architects in New York, who were looking at early childhood education facility in Arkansas. And it was really saying, if you think about volume, surface, and toxicity as 3 main areas, you can say, what I'm going to focus on is where the most volume of a chemical might occur, and that might occur in these particular products in the wall or the insulation seals. And focus on those, and if I do that, then I can avoid using those chemicals at all, and that means I've removed that chemical use from the building, like pounds and pounds of chemical use. I might think about, in this case, the children, where the children come into contact with surfaces most often, and then we're talking about the kind of level of the children, so it's flooring, rugs, furnishings, millwork, and countertops, or we could focus on toxicity, and those are all the kind of the wet applied things that you don't necessarily think of, except when you remember what they smell like. Those areas, all of those wet applied and textiles, and think about how you might be able to remove those with some kind of mechanical fasteners. This is something, and you also might think about cost, and often the cheapest materials, right, which are the VCT, vinyl composite tiles, actually don't last as long as some better materials. So if you're working with an affordable housing developer, as we do, who own their buildings, then we can make that it'll last longer and you won't have to replace it in 15 years, and so therefore the long-term cost of this product is going to be less than the product you might have installed, typically the vinyl composite tile, and it's going to be better for the people who live in your buildings, who occupy your buildings in whatever way they do. So, and it takes, and this is an unfortunate thing, more than just design to make a lasting impact. This is some of the work that we did with LTL Architect, which was really around kind of the integrated design process, and really from inception all the way through to occupancy, making sure everybody was informed about what the agenda was. In this case, it was the Walton Foundation, and they were already interested in health and the health of their children, who would be in these centers before the project started. So there was buy-in all the way through, and that was particularly helpful. And so you see David Lewis here going to a lot of meetings with different kinds of constituents and really talking about this issue. And this, I think, became a really important takeaway for us from this project, was the importance of education, and education for everybody in a team. We also created these series of manuals that each of the stakeholders could access so that they could refer to them at different points in the system. And so they were able to kind of execute on this initiative to make a healthy interior because they had these kind of new reference guides. So obviously we're involved in education, all kinds of different educational projects in studios and in material-led courses. But we also saw the need for creating new educational materials, and so we developed this series of courses that we run out of the new school. This is our open campus kind of format. And we were talking about this earlier, we originally thought we could kind of teach this material ourselves. We're architects, designers, we know everything about everything, supposedly. And then we obviously very early on decided that wouldn't be a very good idea at all. And so we had this group of 58 experts in their field who helped us create this course material. And so there are 4 courses. The first is an introduction, the second is the science, and 3 and 4 are really about changing practice to incorporate this kind of knowledge into your regular practice. So extremely interesting process for us to work with all these people who all donated their time to this project, incredibly enthusiastic and well-spoken, And it's kind of an amazing thing. So if you're interested ever in doing something in your free time, you should hop online and take a look at that. Communication's been something that we identified early on. A lot of this material was in the hands of experts, very difficult to understand, so we've been spending a lot of time translating information. And we've done this kind of fundamental research, really interested in legacy chemicals. This is, as I mentioned earlier, in Warren, Ohio, and the legacy chemicals there are lead, asbestos, but also because it was an old steel town, there's a lot of the chemicals from old industry that are still in the soil. So kind of working with our partners there to think about better demolition protocols. And we're really interested in lime, and you'll see. And then we do these demonstration projects, working with partners in New York City to swap out paint, think about new flooring, show evidence of better ways of doing things. In our own school, we've done some acoustic work. We did these living columns for Wanted Design in Brooklyn, and we worked with the Finnish Cultural Institute and made this kind of experience around relationships between food and construction materials. Then we have a library, which has lots of resources and materials. And our outreach is our outreach is outside the school to professions and trying to change the way people see this information. This is the final thing, I'm almost done, sorry. We're really interested in hempcrete at the moment for lots of different reasons. It's an agriculturally based product that uses lime as a binder to join it together to create products from. It creates these blocks, or it creates many different kinds of products, but they're all based on a mined chemical substance, lime, and this industrial hemp that's grown in the field. The hempcrete has great properties. It's natural and it's recyclable, and it's breathable. It has great insulation properties, and it has its own inherent fire resistance, and it also lasts for a really long time. It creates this kind of also virtuous system here of agriculture. Hemp, industrial hemp actually rebuilds soils, doesn't need fertilizer, doesn't need insecticides, doesn't need added irrigation, provides a crop that has value to farmers. Lime is problematic in its mining and in its calcination into lime. But then it becomes it then starts to absorb CO2 in a really interesting way as it becomes bound with the hemp. And then there's all this potential for product development and job creation and educational opportunities with the production of this product. So we're in this stage of thinking about possible products, thinking about new wall sections of how you can use this as it's an infill product, but it replaces a lot of other products in the wall section. The exterior cladding is removed, the moisture barrier is removed, the insulation is removed, the interior sheetrock is removed, and it becomes this simple lime-plastered block system that is really kind of interesting. We've seen evidence of its use in multifamily housing in the south of Italy, and product development both in Italy, in France, and in Belgium. So it's something that is of particular interest for us at the moment. And actually, we're going to be prototyping this in the summer. So working with a farmer in upstate New York and with a New York City developer. We work with partners. Talked about the partnerships a little bit. Incredibly important for us to be able to leverage partnerships and scale our work. So both industry, government, and non-government groups. And then dissemination becomes really important for us, and so Instagram and LinkedIn are quite important for us, as well as our website. And that's our website. Thank you for sticking through. Thank you. Any questions? Thoughts? Reactions?
Have you done any work with rammed earth?
One of the projects that we were looking at earlier was a studio project that we're working on in Lagos, Nigeria. So we're looking at a lot of earth-based products. And clay has some of the same kinds of qualities as hempcrete, a little bit more difficult to scale. And so we want to transform the construction industry a little bit, but so we feel like hempcrete has the ability to be transformed into a product that could substitute for some of the more traditional construction products. But yeah, no, earth and clay are really fascinating products to explore as well. Yeah.
I thought your presentation was really interesting. I'm actually working on a studio project now at Yale's Open Edge Housing, and so feels very relevant, kind of up to date on the scandals. But I'm wondering how much. What I thought kind of was interesting was the economic sell that you could make about the longevity of the products and the overall kind of lower cost, despite maybe initial higher costs. How responsive have you found NHBExYale? NHBExYale
was really responsive to the cost equation. For them, they said that their costs are really tied to labor costs. Those are the costs that drive everything, and that the cost of the material for them was a relative cost. And if it was a little bit more, a little bit less, it wasn't as important as the labor costs. So they were quite receptive to alternative products. You know, and for NHBExYale, I mean, the people we work with at NHBExYale are really committed to public housing and trying to make it work, and it really is. I mean, I think an issue of neglect of a government department from HUD in particular, who hasn't been kind of paying NHBExYale for, I think, 20, 25 years or so. And so they have this kind of backlog of renovations that they just haven't been able to do. But the people we spoke with were amazing, really committed and you know, very dogged in trying to do the best work they could despite the circumstances they were in. So I know it's a very kind of conflicted agency in New York City, but our interactions with them were really phenomenal, and they were very supportive of the work that we did.
That's wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm wondering, you mentioned paint in particular, and some of the more like in the community centers that are often located within the property. Have you been able to specify any of their products?
Yeah, the flooring. We just basically our go-to flooring in that kind of situation is linoleum, which is an old linoleum kind of based product. It's very hard wearing, resilient, very easy to clean, easy to install, relatively easy to install. So they didn't install the flooring; they just did the paint, but they were open to changing up those specifications too.
I wonder if you can talk about how your work is interfacing with things like Living Future Institute's Reveal initiative or the WELL standard.
Yeah, so our work is in affordable housing, right, which is, as I said, kind of, we would say economically it's at the bottom of the market. When we think about the Living Future Institute and WELL, their market, even though Living Futures are looking at affordable housing, it's really the minority of the work. Doing WELL certification or Living Building Challenge, getting certification for those, we know people who try to do that in affordable housing and they haven't been able to meet the material petal qualifications for Living Building Challenge. It's incredibly time consuming to document that work in an office. So, you know, there's a balance of both the kind of materials that you would need to incorporate in your building, the cost of those materials, but just the administrative and research part to really ensure that your products were meeting those certifications, and that is a kind of upcharge in terms of people's fees. So it's more difficult in affordable housing where there's no slack, there's no additional money to do anything, so you're working with very, very lean budgets. So it's really hard. That's why the reducing the material palette, I think, comes in, and it's really useful. There are less things to buy, then what you do buy, you can spend a little bit more on.
It also feels like that would coincide with kind of a certain design aesthetic of like just kind of simplifying and paring down kind of the interior environment.
Yeah. And if you think about like interiors, the way I think historically we've specified, at least in the last 20 years, is, you know, you kind of choose a new product for every use, and just because you can, and there are all these colors and different things you could use. So it's almost like a kind of kid in a candy shop in a way. Do you know? It's like if I have lots of money, I'd go in there and maybe I'd buy everything, but you know, it mean that it's particularly good for me, and it's a particularly good design approach either. I think the challenge of building more simply and more thoughtfully, and really thinking about kind of installation in a way we don't typically think of, I think that adds to your, your design sensibility, your design sense of what is right and best for an interior, and it impacts the way you design that, I think, in a really interesting way. It changes the way you think about space, I think.
Are there particular, what would you say are the most low-hanging fruits so far as materials and material replacements, and those that need more work and more chemical experimentation?
Yeah, so I think some of the just removing things, like the stain resistance and the antimicrobials, those are terrible chemicals. I mean, if you can just make sure that your carpets, for example, or your textiles or your couches don't have those added to those products, then you're in great shape. That's a great win. That's Harvard's approach, I think, in changing their material specifications. They start with simple things like carpets and furniture. Paint is also really interesting, and everybody paints, and in many spaces, 5 of the surfaces are painted. So again, in that terms of area that you're covering, we really do like the lime-based paints a lot, and there's a range of different manufacturers who make those lime-based paints. And I think the benefits there are as you start to think about the wall and the breathability of walls. We've built currently these really airtight buildings, right? So there's no passage of air through walls, and often people don't open windows, and the ventilation is very limited. So you have these problems with mildew and moisture being trapped in buildings, and that creates a whole bunch of other issues. So if you could get more breathable walls, even if you just start with the paint on the walls, so that the gypsum board and the paint are actually, at least there's a little bit of breathing happening there, then you're not trapping moisture in that material, and that seems to me a really low-hanging fruit. The flame retardant thing is tied to the chemical industry, and the benefits of flame retardants are hugely contested. If you have a plastic and you apply plastics are highly flammable, and you apply a flame retardant to it that slows the flame spread by 15 seconds, it's kind of insignificant in the greater scheme of things. So that whole conversation around flame retardants is incredibly emotionally laden, but there are great conversations that could happen there to remove flame retardants and use other means of preventing the spread of fire in buildings. It's a lot of Arlene Blum's work. She's really interesting if you want to kind of do a little search on her, what she's done. It used to be that children's pajamas had flame retardants in them, and so children were sleeping, babies were sleeping in these little, those one-piece things filled with flame retardants, and her research banned the use of flame retardants. Yeah, but the industry is the barrier a lot of the time, and we are the barrier, actually, as architects. We have expectations about, we imagine our buildings should be a certain way, and it's very hard for us to change the way we practice, the way we think about what we're doing. I think that's the biggest barrier, actually. If we can get people to listen, to hear about some of these issues, then people very quickly change the way they think about their practice.
I had another question about, you said you're working with developers in New York. Are you comfortable telling us which developers?
Yeah, we work with a Durst company.
Okay. And is it mainly housing, or is it also like office buildings?
No, it's mainly on this project is housing, and we've worked with them for about 6 years. They're one of the reasons this group of people were formed, and we received this grant and just were refunded for another 3 years, was because of their kind of leadership, their sustainability leadership in this area. They're one of the few developers that have been looking at materials and the relationship between materials and human health for a long time. And they also, so they've been supporters of our work and interested in what we've been doing, but they also own a farm in upstate New York, where they have an organic farm and a composting kind of enterprise. And so they're interested in working in the local community to provide one of the highest rates of poverty, one of the highest rates of homelessness and lack of access to affordable housing is in rural communities. And so we're interested in working in this rural community to design affordable housing using this hempcrete system to do construction. Yeah.
Where is that community?
It's in Milton, New York. Yeah.
Well, it's really it's past 2, and
Yeah.
some people probably need to go, but you're welcome to stay and ask questions, Alison. But thank you so much. That was
Thank you for inviting me.
yeah.
It's great. It was really fun.
There's so much I feel like I want to look into now and
Okay.
look through your website. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if you're not on our list, or